In this tutorial, I will show you how to create this procedural banana material in Blender. If you'd like to purchase the tutorial files and help support the channel, then you can do that over on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I'll have the links in the description. And another great way to help support this channel is by checking out my Blender procedural material packs. So as you may know, I do create a lot of procedural material tutorials. So every time I create another procedural material, I add it to a procedural material pack. So they're packs of 10 realistic procedural materials created with Blender's procedural nodes. So I'll have the links in the description where you can purchase on my Gumroad store. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, then you can also check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. And some other great ways to help support the channel here on YouTube is by checking out the YouTube memberships by clicking right down there on the join button next to the subscribe button. And if you join the YouTube memberships, then you'll be helping to support the channel each month and you'll get some cool perks on YouTube. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to give me a little tip, you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube underneath this video. And I do appreciate your support. Now I am going to be using the pointiness value in the geometry node to get that ripening effect on the edges of the banana. But this pointiness value only works in the Cycles rendering engine. So I would recommend using the Cycles rendering engine if you can, because the pointiness value doesn't work in Blender Eevee, it only works in Cycles. Now before we create the procedural material, we need some sort of banana object to put the material on. So I'm going to start by modeling the banana, and we're actually going to model the banana straight. And then after that, we are going to add a curve object, and we're going to make the curve to be the shape of the banana. And then on the banana object, we are going to be adding the curve modifier, and we're going to select the curve. And so this way we'll be able to change the curve, and that'll change the banana. But why this will also be very helpful is for creating the procedural material, because we're going to be using a gradient texture to create the different colors on the banana. But if we modeled the banana object rotated over, then the gradients would be slanted. And just to show you, I'm going to select the curve modifier, and I'm going to press Ctrl A to apply it. And you can see when I apply the curve modifier, the gradient is now slanted, and that is not what I want. So this is why we are going to model the banana straight, and by modeling the banana straight, the gradient will also be straight. And so the curve modifier will rotate the object, and it'll also rotate the gradient. So let's start by modeling the banana now. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go here to Mesh, and I'm going to add a circle. Now, right after you add the circle, before you click away or move it around or anything, right behind me, there should be an Add Circle setting, and I'm going to click on that little arrow to open it up. And then right here on the vertice count, I'm going to change this to 12. And then I can click on the little arrow there to close the Add Circle settings. So I'm going to press the period key to zoom into the object. And then I want to rotate this object over, so I'm going to hit R to rotate. Let's rotate this on the X-axis, and then I can type in 9, 0, and enter to rotate that over by 90 degrees. And then let's hit S to scale, and I'm going to scale this down, and I'm going to make this a bit smaller, and I want the entire length of the banana to be about 3 of these grids long. So you can see here in Blender there are these grids in the 3D space, and I'm going to make the banana about 3 grids long. So I'm going to scale this down a bit more, and I'm also going to press 7 on the numpad to go to top view, and I'm going to zoom in here. So I can now press E to extrude. Let's hit Y to bring it up on the Y-axis, place it there, and then I can hit S to scale, and we're going to make this a bit smaller, but not too much smaller, just a little bit smaller. And then E to extrude, again hit Y to bring it up on the Y-axis, and then scale it down just a little bit. And then E to extrude one more time, bring this up on the Y-axis and scale it down just a little. So I can now start to scale it quite a bit more down, so I'm going to hit E to extrude, bring it out on the Y-axis, and then this time I'm going to scale this much smaller, maybe even bring it back on the Y-axis, so hit G to grab, bring it back on the Y-axis, and then E to extrude again, bring it out on the Y-axis, and we'll scale this down. So we're now making the top stem for the banana, and then E to extrude again, and we're going to bring this out on the Y-axis. And it's definitely a good idea to be looking at reference images, so I have some references on my other monitor. And then E to extrude again, bring it up on the Y-axis and maybe scale this up just a little bit, and then E to extrude and bring it out on the Y-axis again, and then we'll scale this up. So this is going to be the stem here, extrude that up, E to extrude again, and you can actually click with your middle mouse wheel to constrain it to the Y-axis and then scale that up a bit more and extrude that out again and bring that up. And then I'm going to hold down the Z button, go into the wireframe view, and I'll press B for the box select, and I'm just going to box select all these nodes here, and I can press G to grab and bring them back a bit on the Y-axis. All right, hold down the Z button, go back into the solid view, and then I'm going to hold down the Shift and Alt key and then select that loop right there, and let's scale that down just a little bit. All right, so I'm going to navigate here to the front, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and just select that loop right there, and I can press E to extrude, and then let's hit S to scale, and I'm going to scale this down a bit. Then I can press E to extrude again, and then S to scale again. We'll scale this down a bit more, and then I want to bring it back, so I'll hit G to grab, bring it back on the Y-axis a bit, just bring that in there, and then I can press the F key, and that's going to fill a face there in the center. And then in edit mode, I'm going to press the O key, and the O key is going to turn on this proportional editing. So I'm now going to select this top vertex here, and I'm going to press G to grab. Let's hit Y to bring it on the Y-axis, and then I can scroll my mouse wheel, and that's going to change the size of the proportional editing, and I'm just going to bring this back a little bit. And then I can select this vertex right here. Let's press G to grab, bring it on the Y-axis, and I can scroll with my mouse wheel to scale the proportional editing, and I'm going to bring this out. So basically that stem there is going to have kind of a slant. And then I can also select some other areas and kind of bring them in a little bit if I want to. So maybe kind of on the sides here, bring that in a little bit. All right, tab back to object mode. That's looking pretty good. So I'm going to tab back into edit mode, and I'm going to press 7 on the numpad for top view, and I'm going to navigate here to the center, and then I can hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices there. And then I need to press the O key again to turn off the proportional editing, or you can click right there to turn off the proportional editing. So I can now press S to scale. I'm just going to make this a tiny bit smaller, and then I can press E to extrude. Again, click with your mouse wheel, or you can hit the Y to bring it over on the Y-axis and just stick that there. And then I can scale this down just a little bit. So I can now press E to extrude again, bring it out on the Y-axis, and we'll scale that down even smaller. And it looks like the entire banana is a little bit too long, so I'm just going to press the A key to select everything, and then I can scale this with S on the Y-axis, and I'll just make that a little bit smaller, and then bring it down a little bit. All right, that is better. And then hold down the Alt key, select that loop of vertices, and I can press E to extrude again, bring it out on the Y-axis, and then S to scale. We're gonna scale that even smaller. And then E to extrude again, bring it out on the Y-axis, and scale the entire thing down again. And then I'll press the period on the numpad to zoom into it. Let's navigate over here, and then I'm going to press E to extrude and then S to scale. We're going to scale this down just about that far. Click to place that there. Maybe just scale it down a little bit smaller. Maybe place that there. And then I can press the F key to fill a face. Now I want to add a little bit of detail there to the end of the banana. So I'm going to click right up here to go to the face select. You can also press the 3 on the top of your keyboard to go to the face select. So I can now select this face and then hold down the Shift key. And we're going to select 2 faces. Then we're going to skip a face and then hold down the Shift key and select 2 more. Then we're going to skip a face and select 2 more, and then select these last 2. So we now have those faces selected. So I can press E to extrude. Let's just extrude these out. And then I want to scale them down, but I don't want to scale them down altogether. I want to scale them down by their individual origins. So let's click right up here on the transform pivot point, and I'm going to change this to the individual origins. So I can now press S to scale, and we're going to scale the entire thing down a bit and maybe bring it back a little bit on the Y-axis. So something like that. Let's navigate right back over here to the stem. So I can press 7 on the numpad for top view, zoom into the stem, and I'm gonna press 1 on the top of my keyboard to go back to the vertex select. I'm gonna hold down the Alt key and just select that loop of vertices, and then I can scale that down a little bit more. All right, let's tab back into object mode, and then I want to add a subdivision surface to this to smooth it out. So I'm gonna press Control 2. So Control 2 will add a subdivision surface modifier, and then using the object context menu, you can shade the object smooth. And then I'm going to tab back into edit mode, and I'm going to zoom over here, and I'm going to click on this button right here, or you can also press the O key to turn on the proportional editing. I'm going to select this vertex again and press G to grab and just kind of bring this back a little bit and maybe bring the top out just a little. So that's looking pretty good, but the banana looks a bit more like a hot dog. It's very round, and bananas do have a bit of sharp edges. So the banana peel does have some areas where it just kind of comes out just a little bit. And so I'm going to to select some of these loops here, and I'm going to bring them out a little bit. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key and just select this loop right here, and then navigate over here, and I'm going to hold down the Shift and Alt key and select this loop right there. And then navigate over here, and this time I'm going to skip 2, so I'll hold down the Shift and Alt key and select that one right there. Then I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select that one right there. So we now have 4 selected, and then I'll select one here kind of in the middle, so I will hold down the Shift and Alt key and select that one right there. So you can now see that we have 5 different loops going from the front to the back. So I now want to scale these loops up a bit, but first I want to deselect the front and the back. So I'm going to press 3 on the numpad, that's going to go to the side view. And I can hold down the Z button and move my mouse over to the wireframe. And I'm going to press B for the box select, and then I can click and drag with my middle mouse wheel, and that's going to deselect the vertices, and then let go. And then hold down the Shift key, click with my middle mouse wheel to pan over here, and then press B for the box select, and I'm going to click and drag with my middle mouse button, and then let go, and that's going to deselect those vertices. So I can hold down the Z button, go back into solid view. You can see we just have 5 of those loops selected, and they're just in the center. So I can now press 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I'm going to zoom in here. And then before I scale these, I want to scale them from the center. So I need to click back right here on the transform pivot point, and I'm going to change this to median point. And then I also want to turn off the proportional editing, so you can click on that button right there. Now right now, if I just press S to scale, it's going to scale it on all the axes, so it's also going to scale it on the y-axis, but I only want it to be scaled up on the z-axis and the x-axis, but not the y-axis. So I'm going to press 1 on the numpad again to go to front view, and I'll hit S to scale. But then I'm going to hit Shift Y. So Shift Y is going to remove the y-axis, so it'll only scale it on the x-axis and the z-axis. So now I just need to scale this up just a little bit so it's a bit pointy. And it shouldn't be very much, so just something like that. So I now need to do the same thing for the other loops, but I need to bring them in a little bit. So to select the other loops, what I can do is I can just press Control I, and Control I is just going to invert the selection, so now all of the other loops are selected. Now again, we want to deselect the front and the back of the banana, so let's press 3 on the numpad to go to side view, hold down the Z button and go into the wireframe, and then I can press the B key for the box select, and then make a box around the back of the banana and let go. That'll deselect it. Navigate over here, B for the box select, click and drag with the middle mouse button, and then let go, and that's going to deselect that area. So now we just have the very center there selected. So I can press 1 on the numpad to go to front view. I'm going to zoom in here. Let's do the same thing, but this time we're going to scale it in. So we're going to hit S to scale, but then I don't want to scale it on the y-axis, so I'm going to hit Shift Y. That's going to remove the y-axis, and then I can just scale this in just a little bit. But don't do it too much because I don't want it to look like a star shape or something. So I just want to scale it in a little bit, so something like that. Alright, so I can tab to go back to object mode, and if you now look around at the banana, you can see there's some little sharp areas. So like this area is a little bit sharper, and also this area is a little bit sharper, and it is subtle, but it does make it look a lot more like a banana. And you'll be able to see it better when the banana is rotated over. So there we go, there is the banana object. So now let's add a curve, and then we'll rotate the curve to the shape of the banana. So make sure you're in object mode, and I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go here to curve, and I'm going to add the BZA curve. And then I'm going to press the tab key to go into edit mode, and I'm going to press 7 on the numpad to go to front view. So I can now select this first handle here. I can press R to rotate and G to grab, kind of rotate this over. Select this handle. I could also scale the handle up a bit and then rotate it over. And maybe select this handle and scale that up as well. So let's press the tab key now to go back to object mode, and then I can select the banana. And I was in full screen mode by pressing Control Spacebar, so I'll just hit Control Spacebar to go back out of the full screen mode. So then right over here, go to the modifier properties, and you can see here's the subdivision surface modifier that we added on the banana. So make sure you have the banana object selected. Let's click on add modifier, and I'm going to add the curve modifier, so it's under deform curve. And then right here on the curve object, you can click on the eyedropper, and you can select the BZA curve, or you can also find it here in the drop down. Now you can see the banana is acting a bit weird, so what I'm going to do is click on this little monitor icon icon, and this way we won't be able to see the curve modifier. So I can now hit R to rotate, and let's type in 9, 0, and enter to rotate the banana over by 90 degrees. And I can now click on this button to preview the modifier again. So that is much better. So now the banana is actually following the shape of the curve. So I can press G to grab, and I'm going to hit X to bring this over on the X-axis, and I can now just bring the banana over and it's going to follow that curve. So just stick it right there so that the banana geometry is basically in the center of the curve. And then if you want to change the curve shape, just select the curve and you can press the tab key to go into edit mode. You can press 7 on the numpad for top view, and you can rotate this over and also scale it. Just kind of scale the handles and rotate them over to change the shape there of that curve. Now there is a problem. If you zoom in here really close, you can see the banana does look a little bit sharp as it's rotating over, and that's because the subdivision surface modifier is coming first and then the curve. But I want to instead have the curve modifier first, and then I want the subdivision surface modifier to be applied on the object after it's curved. So to do this, you can click on these little dots right here and you can drag up, and then the curve modifier will be first. And this way it's going to curve it first and then apply the subdivision, so it's going to be much more smooth. And then if you move the banana around or move the curve around, it's going to mess up the shape of the banana. So if you want to move these objects, you need to select both of them. So select the banana, hold down the shift key, and then select the curve. And I'm doing this in object mode. And then if I move these objects together, they're not going to be deformed. So I'm going to hit R to rotate. I'm going to rotate this on the X-axis, and I can type 9, 0, and then I need to also type negative, so negative 90, and then enter so that the banana is rotated over. And then I can press G to grab. Let's bring this up on the Z axis, and I'm going to stick it there. And then I also added a camera, so if you want to, you can press Shift A and you can add a camera, and I just pointed the camera from front view looking at the banana. So I can press the 0 on the numpad. That's going to go into the camera view, and then just make sure you have the banana and the curve selected. And I'm just going to rotate this object over and just kind of fit it into place there. Maybe rotate that over on the Z axis, so something like that. And then just like with all of my other procedural materials, I like to preview the materials on a sphere. So if you want to do that, you can press Shift A, and I'm going to go here to Mesh, and I'm going to add an icosphere because you can make icospheres nice and round. And then again, right behind me, right after you add the icosphere, you can click on the arrow there to open up the Add Icosphere settings. And then once this is opened up, you can turn up the subdivisions. So I'm going to turn these subdivisions up to like a 6, so it is nice and smooth. And then using the object context menu, I can shade the object smooth. And then I'll press 7 on the numpad for top view, and I'm just going to bring this over and just like stick it behind the banana so that we can preview the material on an icosphere. And then I'm going to hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view so I can preview the material in the rendered view. And I am also in the camera view, and in the camera view I pressed Control B, and then I just dragged a box around the camera, and this is going to add a boundary so it will only render what is inside the camera view. And then just one other thing I want to do to the banana object. If you go back over here to the modifier properties, I want to turn up the subdivision levels to 3, and this is going to add a little bit more detail, and you'll just be able to see the shape a little bit better just because it is more subdivided. So I'm going to turn up the levels viewport and render up to 3. And then I added a camera and just stuck the camera pointing at the objects, and then I'm going to hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view. Now for the lighting, if you go right over here to the world properties, I added in this Machine Shop 02 1K HDR. So this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. I'll have the link in the description if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K HDR version. So if you add a new world, you can click here on the color, click on the yellow dot, and you can choose environment texture, and then you can click on the open button and just open up the downloaded HDRI. And then also if you go right up here to the render properties, let me just close these settings here. I'm going to open up the color management, and I set the view transform to filmic and also the look here to high contrast. And so this is going to make the colors more contrasty and saturated, and it'll make the render look nicer. And then also if you want to make the background transparent so you can't see the HDRI, you can open up the film tab and you can check mark this transparent button so that the background is transparent. So I am in the shading tab, so I have the 3D space right here, and then I also have the shader nodes right here. So I'm going to make this smaller so that we have a big space here to work on the procedural material. And then just one more thing before we create create the procedural material, I am going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on. So if you don't have that enabled, you can click on Edit and you can go to the Preferences, and then over there in the Add-ons tab, you can search for Node Wrangler and just check mark the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So just select the object and I can click on New here, and I can just rename this to Procedural Banana. And then I'm going to click and drag this material and I'm going to drop it onto this other object here, or just select it by clicking on the drop down. Now while you're following the tutorial, there is a possibility that this might happen, and I don't know exactly why this happens. It happens for me sometimes when I was creating this banana material, and basically what it's doing is it's flipping the gradient and it almost looks like a chocolate dipped banana. So I don't know why this is happening. I believe it's just a bug. It probably has something to do with the curve modifier that we added onto the banana, but if this problem is happening while you're following along with the tutorial, how I've found to fix this problem is to just double tap the tab key, and that's going to take you into edit mode and then back to object mode, and that should fix the problem. And if that doesn't fix the problem, you could also go back to the solid view and then tap the tab key again to go into edit mode and then back to object mode and then go back into the rendered view, and I find that that helps to fix the problem. You could also save the Blender file and close it and then open it up again, but I do find that if I just go into edit mode and then go back to object mode, that just resets the material and then it should work correctly. So to start off with the procedural material, I'm going to be creating the base color. So the base color is obviously going to be yellow, but then I do also want to add just a little bit of green at the stem. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a gradient texture. We're going to drop the gradient texture right down here. And then with the gradient texture selected, I'm going to press Ctrl T. That's using the feature of the Node Wrangler add-on, and it's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. And I can just Ctrl Shift and select the gradient texture to preview it. And then I do just want to use the generated coordinates. That works great for the gradient texture. And then I can use the mapping node to change the location of the gradient. So if I look around here at the material, you can see the gradient texture is actually on the bottom here, and over here on the sphere it's on the side. So I want to rotate it so it's going up and down. So I can take the rotation Y and I can rotate this over. And so I'm going to rotate this over by 90 degrees. So you can just punch in 90 there on the Y rotation. And now you can see on the banana object that the gradient is black there on the top. And on the sphere, it's actually black on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is actually just hit R to rotate. I'm going to rotate this on the X-axis, and I will type in 180 for 180 degrees and then hit enter. So now the sphere is the same rotation as the banana. So the top of the banana is also going to be the top of the sphere. Now this mapping node is a little bit big, so I'm just going to click on this little arrow here to make it smaller. And I can also just click right here on these little tabs here and kind of drag this in to make it smaller. And I'm going to stick that there and bring this in. So now I want to change the colors of the gradient. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the color ramp node, and I'm going to drop the color ramp node right in here after the gradient. So I can now drag these colors, and you can see that the gradient texture is going to go down the banana. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial, if we had modeled the banana rotating over, then the gradient texture would be slanted, but because the banana is actually straight, the gradient is also going to be straight. And then the curve modifier is going to rotate the banana, so it's also going to rotate the material. So I'm first going to drag the black tab out, and wherever it's black, it's going to be green. So then I need to click on the black tab, and I'm going to make this a green color. So I'm going to make this a bit brighter, and then also make this a green color, but it's not going to be super green. It's kind of going to be a yellowish green color, and maybe I'll make it a little bit darker. And if you'd like to use the same exact color that I'm using, then you can click right over here on the hex value, and you can punch in a hex value of 8496C34. So that's the green color that I'll be using. And then let's click on the white tab, and I'm going to drag this out a bit so that there's a bit more of the white, and wherever the white is, that is going to be yellow. And then of course we need to change this to a yellowy banana color. So let's click on the white tab, and I'm going to make this a yellow color. So it's going to be pretty yellow, but it's also going to be a little bit towards the orange. And if you want to use the same exact color that I'm using, then over here on the hex value, you can punch in a hex value of FF A000. So that is the banana color that I'll be using. Alright, so all of these nodes here are used to create the base color. And because this procedural material will get a little bit big and a little bit complex, I am going to organize my nodes very well. So I'm going to press B for the box select, and I'm just going to box select all these nodes here. I can now press Ctrl J, and that is going to join the nodes all together into a frame. And I'm just going to drag them all up so that the frame is as small as it can be and as compact as it can be. And then if you select the frame, you can press F2, and that is going to add a frame label. And I'm going to rename this to base color. So just base color. So now I want to create all of the little dots which are on the banana. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the Voronoi texture, and let's drop the Voronoi texture right here above the base color. And then with that texture selected, I can press Ctrl T. That's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. Now I don't need the mapping, so I can select it and press X to delete it. And then let's plug the object coordinates up to the vector. And then I also want to Control Shift and select the Voronoi texture. And why I'm using the object coordinates is because the object coordinates will place the texture on the object more evenly. Because you can see here's the Voronoi texture without the object coordinates, and the Voronoi texture is actually a little bit stretched. But if I plug the object from the texture coordinate up to the vector, now there's no stretching, the scale is better, and the texture is placed more evenly around the object. So we're going to use the dots here to create those dots on the banana. Now if I zoom into the Voronoi, you can see there are some little sharp white areas. So I'm going to click on the F1, and I'm going to change this instead to smooth F1. So this is going to be basically the same texture, but it's going to give us this smoothness value. If I make this bigger, you can see there's a smoothness value, and I can drag the smoothness value, and I'm going to leave it all the way to 1 so it's very smooth in between those circles there. And then for the scale here, I'm going to make this like 50 so that those circles are much smaller. Now if I zoom closely up to the circles are very smooth, and so I do want to make them just a little bit distorted on the edges, and that'll give each circle a little bit of variation. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and we're going to stick the noise texture right up here. And then I want to plug the object up to the vector on the noise texture, and then I can Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. So I want to turn the scale to like a 4, and then I also want it to be very detailed, so I'll turn the detail all the way up to 15. And then to add some more detail, I will turn the roughness to a 0.6. So I am now going to use the noise texture to distort the placement of the Voronoi. So to do this, I can press Shift A. I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the Mix RGB. And we're going to stick the Mix RGB right here before the Voronoi. And then I want to put the noise texture factor into color 2, and then the object coordinates will be going into color 1. So now if I Control Shift and select the Voronoi texture, you can see it's being distorted by the noise texture. And if I drag the factor all the way to 0, it's not going to distort it at all. But then as I turn the factor up, the noise texture is going to distort it more and more. Now, as I drag this value, it's moving it around a lot, and I don't want it to be moving around so much. So I'm going to click on the mix here, and I'm going to change this instead to the linear light. And this way I can drag the factor, and it's not going to move around the texture, it's just going to distort it. Now I only want the noise texture to be distorting it a tiny little bit. So on the factor here, I'm going to change this to a 0.05. So now if I zoom in closely, you can see the circles are distorted a little bit, so they have some noise there, but they are mostly still a circle. So I'm going to drag the noise texture down here, and I can bring the texture coordinate in just to kind of compact the nodes. And then I'm going to press B for the box select, just box select all these nodes. And then I can press Ctrl J, and that is again going to add a frame. And then if you select the frame, you can press F2 to rename the frame, and I'm just going to rename this to dot. Now I don't want the dots to be all over the place, I just want them to be in some parts here and there, but I also want some areas to not have any dots. So to do this, I'm going to select this noise texture, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's stick it up here above this one. And then I can plug the object into the vector so it's using the object coordinates. I can also bring this up here, and then I can Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. So for this noise texture, I'm going to turn the scale to like a 5, and then I do want a little bit less roughness, so let's turn the roughness value to a 0.55. So we can now use the noise texture to make some places have the dots, but then other places to not have the dots. Now this noise texture is not very contrasty, it's pretty gray right now. So to make it more contrasty, I can press Shift A, I can go here to the search, and I can search for a color ramp, and we're going to stick the color ramp right here after this noise texture and make sure it is in the dots frame. So then I can drag these two tabs together, and that's going to make it more contrasty. So I'm going to drag them pretty close together here, kind of in the center. So we now have a mask to tell it where the dots are going to be. So I want to mix this with the Voronoi. So I'm going to select the color ramp, hold down the Shift key and select the Voronoi, and then I can press Control 0. And Control 0 is using a feature of the Node Wrangler, and it's going to add this Mix RGB, so it's mixing these two textures together. And I'm going to stick it here inside the frame and then just bring it over. Now I only want to add the light values, so if I click on this mix here, I'm going to instead change this to lighten, and then I can turn the factor all the way up to 1. So this top color ramp is going to be going into color 1, and then the Voronoi is going to be going into color 2. And so by turning it to lighten, it's just going to add the light values. But if I zoom in here, you can see that where the dots are, it's kind of gray, and so I want to make that more contrasty as well. So I'm going to click on this color ramp, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's drop it right here after the Voronoi texture. And then I can bring the color ramp over here, and let's also pull the entire dots frame back a bit. So I can now play around with this color ramp, and that's going to make it more contrasty. But then around the dots, I want that to be very light. So I'm going to drag this black tab back a bit, maybe drag it to about here, and then also drag the white tab over. But then you can see this noise texture is giving some areas here and there where there aren't any dots. And so that's going to make it more organic and natural. And you can of course play around with the color ramp if you want to change how strong that is. And also right here on this top noise texture, you can play around with the scale. So if you want to make that bigger, you can, or also smaller. I think 5 looks pretty good. And if you want to change how many dots there are, you can change this scale value. So I think I might actually just change this to like a 45 so that the dots are a little bit bigger. So we now have a black and white texture, and I want to mix that into the base color. So I'm going to select the color ramp, and then I can hold down the Shift key and select the lighten. So I can now press Control 0, and that's going to add this Mix RGB. Let's just open this up and just bring it over. So I'm going to take the lighten here, and I'm going to put it instead into the factor. And the factor is going to tell it where it's going to be color 1 and where it's going to be color 2. And then this color ramp here from the base color can go into color 2. So you can now see that color 1 is going to be the color of the dots. So I'm going to make this a orangey color, and then I will make it darker, and that way it's going to be kind of a dark brown. And if you'd like to use the same exact color that I'm using for the dots on the banana, you can punch in a hex value of 3D 1700. So you can put that color into color 1, and that's going to make the dots a brown color. And also make sure you press Ctrl S to save the Blender file. So the next thing that I want to add is some procedural noise, and we're going to use that to create some little ripe areas. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the Musgrave texture. Let's stick this up here, and then with the Musgrave texture selected, I can press Control T. That's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping, but I don't need the mapping, so I can select the mapping and press X to delete it. And then let's Control Shift and select the Musgrave texture to preview it. And you can again see that the texture is stretching a little bit. So let's put the object into the vector, and that way the texture will be placed on the object more evenly. Now on the Musgrave texture, I'm going to leave the scale at 5, but I'm going to turn the detail all the way up to the max, which is 15. And then on the dimension here, I'm going to turn this down to a 0.4, and that's going to give it a bunch more detail. And then let's also turn the lacunarity to like a 3. And that's going to give a little bit more detail. You can see there's a bit more detail there in the Musgrave texture. So I'm now going to press B for the box select, just box select these nodes, and I can press Control J, that will add a frame to them. And then with the frame selected, you can press F2 to rename this, and I'm just going to rename this to noise. So now let's bring this noise over, and I want to stick it into the color as well. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate. Let's bring this mix up here, and then I can take the Musgrave texture height, and we're going to put that into the factor of the new mix. And then this mix right here is going to go into color 2. So then color 1 is going to be wherever the noise is. So I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. Now you can see that is way too much, and that banana has way too much brown. So I want to add a color ramp to change the Musgrave texture. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search. I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we're going to stick the color ramp right here after the Musgrave, and then you can stick it inside the noise frame, and then just bring this over here. So I can now change the colors, and that's going to change how much Musgrave texture there is. So I'm first going to click on the arrow right here, and I'm going to click on Flip Color Ramp. And now there's much less of the Musgrave texture. And then I can also drag these together, and I'm going to drag them together just a little bit so they're a bit more contrasty. Now I don't want those dark areas to be quite that dark, so if I click on the black tab and make it lighter, you can see it starts to fade away. So I'm just going to make this a gray color so that those dark areas are a little bit less visible. Alright, so the next layer of texturing that I want to add is some browning along the edges. When the bananas get very, very ripe, they have more brown areas on the edges of those bananas. So we're going to be adding the geometry node, and we're going to use the pointiness value to create those dark areas along the edges of the banana. So let's press Shift A, and I'm going to go here to the search, and let's search for the geometry node, not to be confused with geometry nodes. This is the geometry node in the shader editor. And then I'm going to also press Shift A, go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the color ramp, and let's stick this here. Now why I'm using the color ramp is because the pointiness value is pretty hard to see on default, so we need to make it more contrasty. So let's take the pointiness from the geometry node, we're going to put that into the factor of the color ramp, and then I can Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. So I can now drag these colors together, and that's going to make it more contrasty. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, if you are using Blender Eevee, then the pointiness value won't work, so make sure you are using Cycles Render if you want to use the pointiness value, and also make sure you're in the rendered view, because in the material preview you can't actually see the pointiness value. And then I actually want to flip these because I want the black to be the smaller part, and then I want most of the banana to be white. So I'm just going to flip these two colors and then drag them together so they're very contrasty. So something like that. So this way the edges which are popping out the most are going to be that darker color. Now this dark area right here is actually very smooth, and I want it to be a bit more random and organic and natural because it is the ripening of the banana peel, but right now it's just very smooth. So I'm going to be adding a texture to it to make it more noisy. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and let's stick the noise texture here. Let's actually bring the geometry node back and then stick the noise texture right there and bring that over. And then with the noise texture selected, I can press Ctrl T, and then we can click on the mapping node and delete it with the X button. And then again, I want to plug the object into the vector of the noise texture. And then let's Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. So I'm going to turn the scale of the noise texture to 15, and then let's turn the detail all the way to the max, which is 15 as well. So I'm going to mix this noise texture with the pointiness value to give the pointiness value some noise. So to do this, let's bring the color ramp out, and then I can press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for the mix RGB, and we're going to stick this here in between the pointiness and the color ramp. Now the pointiness value is going to go into color 2, and then the noise texture factor is going to go into color 1. And then I'm also going to Control Shift and select the color ramp so I can preview that. So if I drag the factor value, that's going to change between only using the pointiness or only using the noise. Now I mostly just want to use the pointiness value, and I only want to use a tiny bit of the noise. So I'm going to turn the factor value to 0.97. And this way it's mostly going to use the pointiness value, but there's just going to be a little bit of noise in there. And then also right over here on the color ramp, I want to make this more contrasty so you can only see the noise where it is dark. So I'm going to drag these back a little bit, and you kind of drag that forward and just bring these really, really close to each other so that the banana is very white most places, but then it's a little bit dark there where the edges are. So something like that. All right, so there we go. We have a really cool texture there. So I'm going to zoom out here and press B for the box select. Just box select all these nodes, and then I can press Control J. Control J is going to add a frame. And then with the frame selected, I can press F2 to rename it. And I'm going to rename this to Edge darken. So edge darken. So we can now take the edge darken and we can mix it into the color with another mix RGB. So I'm going to select this mix RGB. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, stick it up here, and then I can take the color from this mix and I can put that into color 2. So then this edge darken, we're going to take the color and we're going to put that into the factor. And then I can Control Shift and select the mix. So now that is being mixed together with the other color, and color 1 is going to be that brown color on the edges. And I'm just going to leave it as that brown color, which is in the other mix RGBs. Now this brown part on the edges is pretty strong, and I do want to make it a little bit less subtle. So right here on the edge darken, if you go to this color ramp, you can click on the black tab and you can make it more white. And as you turn it up, it's going to be less visible. So I'm just going to make this kind of a gray color so it's a bit less visible. Alright, so let's do the next set of textures. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to actually get rid of all of these textures which are on the stem, and also some of the textures which are over here at the end of the banana. Usually all of the little dots and all the little brown areas are only in the center of the banana, but then the stem of the banana and the back here of the banana, those parts usually don't have very much texture. Although the banana does have some brown areas on the front and back, and we will add that in later. But for now, I'm just going to create a mask, and then we're going to use that mask to remove all of the texture here on the banana. So to do this, I'm actually going to navigate way back down here, and then I'm going to make sure everything is deselected, and I'm going to press B for the box select, and I'm just going to box select the base color frame and all the nodes. I can now zoom out here, and then I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to bring this way up here, so we can use the same node setup that we added. And then I can click on the base color, and I'm going to press F2 to rename this, and I'm going to rename this to Texture Mask. So texture mask, because we're going to be masking out those textures that we added. Now I don't want to use these colors here, I don't want to use the green and yellow, so I'm going to click on the drop down on the color ramp, and I'm going to click on Reset Color Ramp, and now it's back to white and black. And then I can Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. So I now want to create a black area on the front and the bottom of the banana. So I'm going to start by dragging out the black tab, and that's going to bring out the gradient and kind of bring it down, and then I'm going to click on the white tab and I'm going to bring it over to make it more contrasty. So I'll bring the black tab to about here, and then the white tab to about there. And then I'm going to hold down the Control key and click to add another tab, and I'm going to bring the tab all the way over, and then if I click on this color on this tab, I'm going to make this fully black. So if I make it fully black, now it's adding another dark area right there. But then you can see that it's fading a lot, and I don't want it to be fading that much, so I'm going to hold down the Control key and click again in the color ramp to add another tab, and then this one, I'm going to make this fully white. And then I can drag it over, and I can drag it very close to make it more contrasty. And then I can also drag the black tab out just a little bit, so it's a bit more contrasty on the end there. So now you can see that our gradient has black, and then it goes to white, and then it goes back to black. So I now want to mix this in with the color as well. So let's click on the mix here. I can press Shift D to duplicate it, and I can actually just stick it in this wire here, and that way the viewer node is going to preview it, or you can Control Shift and select the mix RGB. Now with the texture mask, I want the color ramp color to be going into the factor. So let's pull this wire out of color 1 and put it into the factor of this mix. And then this mix RGB is going to be going into color 2. So now color 1 is going to be the starting of the banana and the ending of the banana. But I don't want it to be this brown color. I want it to instead be the original base color of the banana. So that would be the green and the yellow. So instead of using this color here for color 1, I'm going to go right down here to the base color, and I'm going to pull out a wire from this color ramp from the base color. And then I can push here in the edges, and that's going to move my view up, and I'm going to stick it into color 1 of this mix RGB. So now wherever the black and white values are from the texture mask, that is where it's going to be the original yellow and green. Now I do want to adjust this a little bit, so I'm going to zoom in here, and then I can drag these values. So on the texture mask color ramp, I can drag the white values, so you can see that is getting rid of the texture. So if I want more texture, I could bring that up, but I don't really want to have the dots on the stem because bananas don't have dots on the stem, so I'm going to bring that back a bit. And then also if I go back here to the bottom of the banana, I can kind of drag this around, and I do want that to be fading just a little bit, so something like that is pretty good. Let's press Control S again to save the Blender file. Now we plugged the base color into this mix here, and you can see that wire is like overlapping, and I want to be able to organize it better so it looks better. So I'm going to drag this down, drag the mix down, and then I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to right click and drag over the wire and then let go. And that is going to add this reroute, and I can click on the reroute, and I'm going to drag it up here, also bring the mix up. And I'm just going to bring this up here so that this line is going straight. So just kind of bring that over there. And then also I want to add another reroute down here. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key, right click and drag and let go. That'll add another reroute, and I can just bring this reroute right down here. So this is just a nice way to organize the nodes so it looks a bit more clean and neat, but it's not actually going to change how the procedural material looks. All right, so there are two more main things that I want to add to the banana. I want to add a dark area on the top of the stem, and then I also want to add that dark brown area on the very bottom of the banana. So I'm actually going to use this texture mask because we've already set it up with the gradient and the mapping, so we can use the same node setup. So I'm going to press B for the box select, just box select all these nodes here and the frame, and then I can press Shift D to duplicate, and let's stick this up here. Now if I click on the texture masks frame here, I can press F2 to rename this, and I'm just going to rename this to bottom mask. So we are going to use this to create a little dark area on the very bottom of the banana, and then that's going to be kind of the little brown bit which is on the bottom of the banana. So let's Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it, and then I want to click right here on the arrow, and I'm just going to click on Reset Color Ramp. And then I need to click on the black tab, and I'm going to drag the black tab over, and I'm going to bring that very close, so just bring it all the way there. And then I can zoom in there to get a closer look. Now if I look closely at this gradient, the edge is very smooth, but I want this to look much more natural and random and organic, so I'm going to be mixing a noise texture into the gradient to make it kind of random and make it kind of going back and forth. And this is a subtle detail, but it will really help to make the banana look more realistic. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and I'm going to stick the noise texture up here. And then I can drag this texture coordinate up so there's more space, and then I'm just going to bring down the mapping so there's some more space, and bring the noise texture down, and then I can kind of stick this down here. And then let's put the object into the vector of the noise texture, and then I can Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. So let's turn the scale up to like a 15, and then let's also turn the detail all the way up to the max of 15. So I'm going to bring the gradient texture down, and I'm going to bring the color ramp out a bit so there's some more space here. So I want to mix the noise texture with the gradient before it goes into the color ramp. So I'm going to select the noise texture, hold down the Shift key and select the gradient texture, and then I can press Control 0, and Control 0 is going to add a mix RGB, and for some reason it added it way down here, so I'm just going to drag this way back up, and we're going to stick it inside the bottom mask frame. And then I can click on the arrow to open it up, and we are going to take the mix RGB color and we're going to replace that in the color ramp. And then I can drag it down here, and I'll just bring the color ramp back. So I want the noise texture to be going into color 1, and then the gradient texture to be going into color 2. And I can Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. So now that we've mixed that together, it's like fully black. So I'm just going to drag this back out, kind of drag it there into the center so you can see what it's doing. Now if I drag the factor here of the mix, it's going to change from only being the gradient to only being the noise texture. But I mostly want it to be the gradient. I just want to have a little bit of noise mixing into that gradient. So I'm going to turn the factor value to a 0.97. And this way it'll mostly be using the gradient texture, but there's just a little bit of noise there. So I can now drag this black tab back over, and I'm going to drag it to the edge there just to add that texture. And I can kind of zoom in there to see it closer. And you can now see that there's all that noise there on the edge of the gradient. And that is exactly what I'm going for. And then I can drag the white tab out so that is a bit stronger, and drag the black tab out so it's more contrasty. So something like that is pretty good. Maybe even drag the black tab just a little bit closer. So something like that is really good. All right, so that is the bottom mask of the banana. So I'm going to press B for the box select and just box select all these nodes here and the frame. And I can press Shift Shift-D to duplicate it. We're going to put this up here. And we're duplicating it because we're going to use the same node setup, but we're going to move the gradient up here to be the top stem. So I'm going to zoom into the stem of the banana, and then I can Control Shift and select this color ramp. And also right here, if you select the frame, you can press F2 to rename this, and instead of it being called bottom mask, I'm going to rename this to stem mask or top mask or whatever you want to call it. So now we can just drag the color ramp and change this. So I'm going to drag the black tab over and also drag the white tab over, and I'm going to bring the white tab all the way over to the other side and then bring the black tab over. And you can see as I bring the black tab over, it's going to bring up that gradient there. So I'm going to bring this all the way up to like the top of the stem, and then I do want this to be more contrasty, so I'm going to bring the white tab closer as well. And I'm going to bring these super close to each other, so that's a pretty sharp mask there. So something like that is pretty good. All right, so we now have the stem mask and the bottom mask. So I now want to mix these two together, and then we will combine that into the color. So I'm going to select this color ramp, hold down the Shift key, select this color ramp, and then you can press Control 0. That's going to add this mix RGB. I don't know why I added it way down here, but you can just kind of drag it back up, and I'll bring it here in between the stem mask and the bottom mask. And I'm just going to open this up. Now I want to add these together, and so I just want to add the light values. So if I click on the mix here, I can change this to lighten, and now if I drag the factor, you can see it's only going to add the light values of the stem mask. So I'm going to turn the factor all the way up to 1, and now it's added these both together. So we can now mix this into the base color. So I'm going to select this mix RGB right here. Let's press Shift-D to duplicate it, drop it here, and then I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. Now for this one, I'm going to take this color here and I'm going to put this into color 1. And then let's go up here and I'm going to take the lighten here. The lighten is mixing together the stem mask and the bottom mask. I'm going to take the color and we're going to put that into the factor of this mix RGB. And then make sure you Control Shift and select the mix RGB. So now you can see that color 2 is going to be the very top and the very bottom colors. So I can click on color 2 and I'm going to make this fully black. And I know fully black might look kind of weird, but we are going to be adding some subsurface scattering, and the subsurface scattering will make it look more brown. So for now, that's just going to be fully black and it'll look better later. All right, so I can now take this final mix RGB. Let's take the color and we're going to stick that into the base color of the principled shader. And then I can Control Shift select the principled shader. And I'm going to box select these two nodes and kind of bring them up here. And let's zoom out here and take a look at the banana. So that is definitely looking a lot like a banana now. Now you can see at the very top and the very bottom are super dark, and that actually looks kind of weird. And so I'm going to add a little bit of subsurface, and the subsurface scattering will allow just a little bit of light to go through the object, and it'll also make it look a bit more organic and natural and make it look more like food. So I'm going to turn this subsurface value to a 0.15. Now you can see that it looks super white right now, and that is because of this subsurface color. So I'm going to make this a bit bigger. You can see there's subsurface color. So for the subsurface color, I'm going to make this a dark red color, kind of a dark reddish brown color. And the hex value for the subsurface color is going to be a hex value of 5E1400. So now if I kind of zoom into the banana, it looks a bit more like food and it looks a bit more organic, and there's a little bit of light going through the banana. Now if you take a look right up here, this doesn't look very realistic. It almost looks like jello or candy or something because there's so much light going through. So to fix this, I'm going to change the subsurface radius. So if you click on the subsurface radius, there are 3 values, and these values are red, green, and blue. So RGB, red, green, and blue. So what I'm going to do is click and then drag down, and then I can drag back and forth, and I'm going to turn all of the values to 0. So now there's no subsurface scattering. But if I turn up the first value, that's going to add more red. If I turn up the second value, that's going to add green. And if I turn up the last value, that's going to add blue. So RGB for red, green, and blue. Now I want to keep them all at 0 except the red value. And for the red value, I just want to add a very small value of 0.1. You can see that there's just a tiny little bit of light coming through here and also a little bit of red light coming through the rest of the banana, but it is much more subtle, and so that looks better. So now there are 2 other main values that I want to add data into. I want to add some texture into the roughness so that some parts are more rough and other parts are more shiny, and then I also want to add some data into the normal to give it just a little bit of bump. So what I'm going to do is take the final mix RGB here for the base color, and I'm going to put this into the roughness. Now I want to have more control over this because you can can see it looks very shiny. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the color ramp, and I'm going to stick the color ramp right here between the roughness and the mix RGB. So I can now change these colors, and that'll control how rough it is. So I'm first going to click on the drop down arrow right here, and I'm going to flip the color ramp. So now the banana is much more rough. But I can now drag the black tab over, and if I drag it over, it's going to be a bit more shiny. So I'm just going to drag this black tab over to about there, maybe a little bit more, so it's a bit more shiny. And then I also want the entire banana to just be a bit more shiny overall. So I can click on the white tab and click on the color, and if I make this darker, the whole banana is going to be more shiny. So I'm just going to make this kind of a light gray, so the whole banana is a bit more shiny. So this is really starting to look like a banana, and we're almost done, but I want to add some data into the normal to give it some bump, because I do want just a little bit of bump over the banana, and then also on the stem of the banana and the bottom of the banana I do want a little bit more roughness, because usually the stem is a bit more bumpy. So the first thing that I'm going to do is take the color here, and I'm going to bring out a wire and stick this into the normal of the principled shader. But we need to convert this to normal data. You can see there's some weird shading issues, and that is because this is color data, but this needs to be normal data. So to convert the color data to normal data, let's press Shift A and go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a bump node, and we're going to stick the bump node right in here between the mix and the normal. And then we want to put the mix RGB into the height value instead. So now the banana is super bumpy, but I don't want it this bumpy. So let's take the strength value, and I'm going to turn this way down to a 0.07. Just a 0.07. So that is going to be pretty subtle, but if I Control Shift and select the bump, you can see what it's doing. So I'll just Control Shift and select the principled shader. Now I also want to add a lot more bump to the stem and the bottom of the banana where it is darker. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the noise texture, and let's just stick it down here. And then with the noise texture selected, I can press Control T, and we can click on the mapping here, and I can press X to delete it. And then let's plug the object up to the vector so the noise texture will be placed around the object more evenly. And then I can Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. So I'm going to turn the scale to like an 8, and then let's turn the detail all the way up to the max so it is very rough. And then I want to make this noise texture more contrasty, so I'll press Shift A. I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the color ramp, and we're going to stick the color ramp here after the noise texture. And then if I drag the black tab over, that'll make it more contrasty, so I'll just bring the black tab over a little bit to about there. Now I don't want this noise texture to be all over the place, I just want this noise texture to be affecting the dark areas on the top and the bottom of the banana. So I need to mix this together with this mask up here. So if I Control Shift and select the lighten, we have a mask of just the top and the bottom of the banana. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go here to the search, and I can search for the mix RGB, and let's bring the mix RGB right up here, and then I'm going to take the color here from the lighten, and I'm going to put that into color 1. Then I can take this mix RGB, and I'm going to drag it all the way back down here, so drag it underneath the bump, and then I'm going to take this color ramp from the noise texture, and I'm going to put the color into color 2. And then I can Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. Now I just want to add the dark values of the noise texture. So let's click on the mix here, and I can change this to darken. And then I can turn the factor all the way up to 1. And now if I zoom in here, you can see that the noise texture is only appearing where those white areas are. And I can turn the factor all the way up to 1, so it's using all of the noise texture. And then I want to organize these nodes very well. So let's press B for the box select, and I want to box select all these nodes, and also box select this here. So we have the texture coordinate and the noise and color ramp, and then also the darken and the bump. So all of these nodes are being used to create the normal. So I'm going to press Control J, that's going to add a frame. Let's just bring this down here. And then if I select this frame here, I can press F2 to rename this, and I can just rename this to normal. So I'm now going to bring this bump node over, and then I want to duplicate this bump node, and then we're going to put this darken into the bump. So click on the bump node, press Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to drop it right here. So the first bump node is converting the mix RGB to normal data, so the normal can just go through the normal. So we now have another height value on this bump node that we can add data into. So let's take the color here from the darken, and I'm going to put that up to the height. And then I can Control Shift and select this bump node to preview what it's doing. Now you can see it is very subtle, so let's turn the strength here on the second bump up to like a 0.3. And now that is much more strong, and you can also see that the noise is only in the area where the dark part is. So I'm going to Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview that. And to give this some more space, I can just bring these nodes back a little bit and bring the normal forward. Now if you zoom up closely to that edge, the bump is a little bit too low, so I just need to sharpen up the mask value. So I'm going to press Shift A, I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and I'm going to stick the color ramp in the wire between the lighten and the darken here in the normal. So if I Control Shift and select this lighten, this is going to be the mask of where the noise is, and so this is going to go into this color ramp first before it goes into the darken. So I'm just going to Control Shift and select the principled shader again so I can see what this is doing. So I can now click on this color ramp that we added, and I can drag this over. And you can see as I drag it over, it's going to make that edge more and more sharp. So the edge is much more sharp and that looks better. And I'm going to bring that to about there. And that way that bumpy area is only where the dark part is. And then also if I navigate right down here to the bottom of the banana, it's doing the same thing right there. So there's just going to be a little bit of bump right there on the edge. So there we have it. There is the procedural banana material. So I'm just going to give this a final render. So there is the final render. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. And if you'd like to help support me and this channel, as well as purchase the material, then you can get that over on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I'll have the links in the description. And if you'd like to purchase more of my procedural materials, you can also check out my Blender procedural material packs. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, then you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist on YouTube. And if you like creating procedural fruit materials, then you might also be interested in checking out my procedural orange material. So I will also have a link to that in the video description. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you for watching.